Bighorn Battlefield National Monument, site of one of the most famous battles in American history, the Battle of the Little Bighorn, named for the Little Bighorn River that flows through the trees right at the foot of the hills here down below you. The last great battle in a 400-year clash of cultures that began in colonial times. But the more immediate roots of the problem came from the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868. Basically gave the Sioux and the Cheyenne the right to roam freely in the so-called unceded territories of eastern Wyoming, eastern Montana, as long as a buffalo shall roam. In addition, gave the Sioux sole ownership of the Black Hills, sacred, bountiful hunting grounds. The Black Hills was to belong to the Sioux forever. Forever lasted 5 years.
Oh, wow.
Then what happens? The great economic collapse of 1873. People were hungry, homeless, and jobless. The next year, 1874, gold is discovered in the Black Hills. Thousands of miners head into the Black Hills. Now this presents a conundrum for President Ulysses Simpson Grant. Do we send the army in to keep the miners out of the Black Hills? Well, gold's a great economic stimulus, so do we send the army in to protect the miners from the angry Sioux? Well, they are violating the treaty. Let's just buy the Black Hills back. Negotiations never come to a fruitful conclusion. Finally, in exasperation, the president, egged on by hawks in the War Department, decides, let's be done with this so-called, quote, their words, folks, not mine, Indian problem. Tell the Sioux and the Cheyenne they must go on to reservations. If they don't go willingly, they'll have to go unwillingly. So, to that end, 3 great armies are sent into the field to find and round up the Sioux and the Cheyenne, force them onto reservations. Out of the south, from Wyoming, General George Crook comes with 1,000 soldiers, in addition to which he has between 200 and 300 Crow and Shoshone Indian scouts. Crow and Shoshone Indians, longtime enemies of the Sioux and the Cheyenne, felt they had to ally themselves with the whites to survive. Matter of fact, no matter what road any of you folks took to get to this battlefield today, you had to drive through what is now, what was the day of the battle, what was before the battle. Land, Crow Indian land, land that Crow considered their own. They looked at the Sioux and Cheyenne as trespassers on their land. They wanted them out of here. Out of the west, Bozeman, Montana, Colonel John Gibbon comes with 500 infantry. And out of the east, Bismarck, North Dakota, Fort Abraham Lincoln, General Alfred H. Terry with 1,000 soldiers, including all 12 companies of the U.S. 7th Cavalry, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer. Morning of June 25th, 1876, at a high point called in the Wolf Mountains out here, about 15 miles from here, a high point called the Crow's Nest, that mountain range in the background there. Custer's Crow and Arikara Indian scouts, yes? Arikara Indians, another tribe, longtime enemies of the Sioux, basically decide to help the soldiers under the premise of any enemy of my enemy is my friend. They spot what they tell Custer is a huge village on the Little Bighorn, but they give him conflicting information. Many say more Indians than you can kill in a day, but some are telling him you got to attack now. The Indians are going to scatter and run. Now Custer was obsessed with the idea the Indians would scatter and run because he knew in time of warfare that any time of army was near an Indian village, the village would pick up and scatter, because the safest, most practical, efficient way to keep the women, children, and other non-combatants safe is to get them out of harm's way. But then Custer receives what he believes is credible evidence the command's been spotted. He feels he can't wait until the next morning. He has to move out. He gives the orders to move out. half a league, half a league, half a league onward, into the Valley of Death, road to 600. Those words were written 22 years earlier by Alfred Lord Tennyson following the charge of the British Light Brigade at the Battle of Balaclava during the Crimean War. The same words Tennyson could have written them about the 7th Cavalry here at Little Bighorn. Custer moves out with 566 enlisted men, 31 officers, fighting force 597 men. He has 50 others with him. He has about 35 scouts, most of them Crow and Arikara, 13 quartermaster employees, and a couple of civilians. Now, neither the scouts nor the quartermaster employees were hired to fight, nor were they expected to fight, although some did. So into the Valley of Death rode to 600, but not all together. All the food for the men, forage for the horses, and extra ammunition being carried by 175 slow-moving mules. The mule pack train cannot keep up with the faster-moving cavalry horses. He sends Major Marcus Reno with 3 companies, 140 soldiers in those 3 companies, tells him to cross the river, attack whatever he sees. Quick geography lesson for those who can turn and see down here into the valley down here. I told you Little Bighorn River flows through the trees that you see running down here at the foot of the hills down below. You follow that tree line till there's a gap in the trees, followed by a single tree. In that gap, about that location is approximately where the north end of the Indian village was the day of the battle. The village extends about 1.5 miles long on the valley floor. It's about a 1/2 mile wide, basically the area between the interstate highway and the river. A village of an estimated 7,000-8,000 Indians, an estimated 1,500, some say 1,800, others say as many as 2,000 are warriors. Now you often hear the Custer stupidly and foolishly rode into a trap here at Little Bighorn. That's not what the Native American accounts say. Yeah, they knew soldiers were in the vicinity, but they thought they were too strong to be attacked. They didn't think anybody would attack them as strong as they were. So when Major Reno crosses the river 5 miles south of here, down in the valley down below, it causes chaos, panic, confusion, and fear throughout the whole village. People, some are screaming, "We're all gonna die." Women, children yelling to their children, "Run, run, the devils are after you, the devil soldiers are after you, run." Many, 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 hundreds of them, women, children, and non-combatants begin fleeing up along the trees and the river here, again, down below you, this whole area up here. Nonetheless, the warriors very quickly respond to the attack. Mrs. Spotted Horn Bull, an Unkpapa Lakota woman, said, "I stood and watched the warriors of my people. They rode like the wind through the village to attack the soldiers. Form a thin skirmish line on the valley floor. They hold it for about 10 minutes, but they're being outflanked. Reno then has his men withdraw into the woods down here in the valley below, a couple miles from here, about 3 miles from here. But they hold that position for about 20 minutes, but they're surrounded, they're outnumbered. Reno doesn't know what to do. He turns to Bloody Knife. Bloody Knife is Custer's favorite scout, the Arikara. "Hey, how do I get out of this mess? What do we do?" All of a sudden, pow! Right in the head. Bloody Knife is shot. Reno's face is splattered with blood and gore. According to some of the surviving soldiers, Reno seems to lose it at this point. He begins screaming out what they would later recall contradictory, panicky kind of orders. "Mount! Dismount! Mount! Those of you who want to make their escape and live, follow me!" He jumps up on his horse. He rides pale-mail out of the timber, the wooded area. He moves across the open plain toward the river. If any formal retreat order is given or sounded by the buglers, a good number of men don't hear it. At least 16 are left behind in the timber. Many others recall 1 minute I was shooting at the Indians, the next minute I look around, everybody else is fleeing, I jump on my horse, I hightail it out of there too. You see those Twin Peaks about 3 miles out yonder? About a mile past that, Reno gets to the top of the bluffs. He's lost 40 men, killed, another dozen or so are wounded and incapacitated. Who comes riding up but Benteen? Benteen has received urgent orders to join Custer immediately. The final message from Custer reads, Benteen, come on, big village, be quick, bring packs. P.S. Bring packs. But when Reno sees Benteen, he says, my God, Benteen, you gotta stop and help me. I've lost half my men. Benteen does stop and help. For the next hour and change, the soldiers do nothing, even though heavy gunfire is heard coming from this general direction. Reno or Benteen and the men, they make it to those Twin Peaks about 3 miles out yonder again. All they see are billowing clouds of dust and gun smoke. They see warriors riding around, shooting at something in the tall grass. The warriors spot those soldiers on the peak. They charge them. Reno and Benteen fall back to their original position, again 4 miles from here. They form a defensive perimeter. They're held under siege the rest of June the 25th and throughout much of the next day, June the 26th, before finally, late in the afternoon, the fighting is finally over. By early evening, the village is seen picking up, moving south toward the Bighorn Mountains. Charles Windolph, one of the soldiers up on the bluffs, would later recall. He said it was like watching an epic biblical exodus moving across the valley floor. This is but what happened to Custer? Where was Custer? Well, the first thing Custer did was stop and get a drink of water. Hey, it was 100 degrees that day, hot, sweltering Sunday afternoon. So, when I talk Custer's movements here, you got to realize absolute certitude is not to be had. There's mountains and mountains of evidence, but much of it's contradictory. Nonetheless, what I think may have happened is this. Custer has 5 companies under his immediate command, 210 men, including himself. Now you got to keep 3 things in mind when you follow Custer's battle here from this point on. First of all, whatever he had in mind, nobody knows because he never shares the information with anybody. He doesn't tell Reno anything. He doesn't tell Benteen anything. Also, Custer most likely does not know that Reno and his men are so badly whipped, they're no longer a threat. That leaves all 1,500 or more warriors free to come up and attack Custer and his 210 men. Finally, Custer doesn't know, probably doesn't realize till his dying few minutes of his life, Benteen's not coming. He's always expecting Benteen to reinforce him with 115 more soldiers. So, Custer, 5 companies, 210 men. They ride down a drainage we call Medicine Tail Coulee, goes down toward the north end of the village in that general vicinity down that way. He gets to the river. He's met with some resistance there. There is fighting. The soldiers never cross the river for whatever reason. There are a couple of casualties, not that many. Custer then will withdraw to a place we call Calhoun Hill. You see the ridge up here in front of you. You follow that ridge all the way up to the end of the ridge. You see a big plant there. At the end of the ridge, to the left of that ridge, out of your sight, about 250 yards away, is Calhoun Hill. And actually, that points out one of the major problems the soldiers would have here this day, the topography. A situation of Native Americans, on the other hand, used greatly to their advantage, as I'll explain. So up on Calhoun Hill, Custer has his 5 companies together one last time. It is here, in my opinion, that Custer makes the fatal mistake of splitting his command once too often, and really it's the fatal mistake, I believe. Custer leaves 3 companies on Calhoun Hill. 120 soldiers in those 3 companies. We call it the right wing. He leaves them there to act as a rear guard and as a beacon for Ben Keene. Custer then takes the remaining 2 companies, 80 men or 90 if you count the 10-man command staff. He rides behind the ridge here in the hill in front of you, sweeps down, goes down to the river. Remember, women, children, non-combatants are hiding down there, right? Many historians believe at this point Custer's battle plan seems to be to try to round up some women and children and other non-combatants to use as hostages, human shields. He knows the warriors aren't going to attack and risk harming their own non-combatants. That would leave the soldiers free to burn, destroy the whole Indian village, kill thousands of ponies. Basically, Custer must think he could probably end the fighting, the killing, the bloodshed, end the whole war right here and now.